Welcome to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy you could join us once again, and happy to welcome a new voice to the program. This is Benjamin Rothove's first appearance on the program. Benjamin, great to have you here. Do you mind taking just a moment to tell us a little bit about your background, who you are, and what you do?
Yeah, my name is Benjamin Rothove. I'm a student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I'm the editor-in-chief of the Madison Federalist, our right of center student newspaper. I've previously interned at Washington Examiner and National Review, and I'm a new Young Voices contributor.
Excellent. I'm looking at an article that you had published in Counterpunch. The title, Are Democrats Losing Gen Z Over Faith? This is such a timely topic, too. Clearly, Gen Z has probably had one of the biggest vibe shifts of any generation within my memory. And I'd love to get your take, the premise for the Democrats losing Gen Z. Are we looking specifically at like the 2024 election, or are there other indicators that would point that that Gen Z just simply isn't resonating with the Democrats like maybe their millennial counterparts did?
Yeah, the 2024 election, I think, was really a big breaking point for young voters, largely because of their shift to the right. And what my article talks about is this isn't purely a political shift. It's a lot more of a cultural shift. For decades, we saw religion in the United States declining, but it looks like we finally reached the point where that decline has stopped. Young Gen Z voters and just young Gen Z people in general are now more willing to go back to church and engage with faith.
And I have to ask, what changed? What would cause that kind of a shift? Or if you don't know, the precise answer, your best opinion, what would cause that kind of a shift?
I think that there's lots of things, but I think that the main one is that young people are generally rebellious. And for many generations, that was meaning rebelling against a generally conservative culture. But in the last decade or two, we've seen the left truly become the cultural titans. So for a young person to be countercultural is to be religious.
That's it's an interesting form of rebellion, but it makes sense. It actually does. Talk to me a little bit about some of the areas where the Democrats, in particular, have alienated Gen Z.
I think it's lots of things. I think that a lot of their messaging has. I think that just not even Gen Z in particular, but in general, if you look at how the voting blocks used to be, Democrats used to get a pretty good portion of Catholics, pretty good portion of evangelical voters, but now it's increasingly a partisan divide. So if you look at the issue of abortion, for example, and even as recently as the 90s, roughly half of Democrats were pro-life, roughly half are Republicans, maybe a little bit more. But now that divide has strictly gone on party lines. So what you've seen is that as the Democratic Party pushed left, it pushed religious people out.
Yeah, definitely there has been a hostility toward, traditional values, including religion. I'm curious, does it go beyond that though? Let's step aside from the religion question. Culturally, is Generation Z more conservative than previous generations?
Yeah, I think Gen Z certainly is more conservative because I think that a lot of our young people are seeing the failures of the past liberal regimes. I think that what they're seeing is increasingly what they were told growing up they would be having, they don't have. So they want to look further back to see a more idealized version of America.
And for that matter, are there people within the Democratic Party who recognize this shift and are working to address it versus, the hardliners who refuse to change?
There's certainly some people who I think recognize a problem, but I think that the way that they engage with it isn't quite the same. Like Eric Swalwell has been making the rounds on some Christian podcasts. But again, he doesn't really change his messaging. He just tries to say, oh, I'm talking to you now, listen to me. Or in Texas, State Rep James Tallarico, who's now running for Senate, has really leaned into how he's a super faithful person. And I'm not questioning his faith. I'm just saying that the way he engages with it doesn't seem to be talking to really religious voters.
So let's talk about maybe some of the people on the right with whom Gen Z more closely identifies. In other words, ones who maybe come off as more authentic in their embrace of traditional values or religion.
Yeah, I think that given the time, it's impossible not to recognize the importance of Charlie Kirk. Like, I think that he as a figure was constantly willing to talk about his faith, and he never backed down from it. I think that like what he built through Turning Point has definitely made young people think that it's important to go to church, to be religious, to think about your faith.
And it seems like he was able to do that in such a way that it didn't come across as, someone very pious dictating, this is what you must do from their ivory tower. I mean, he seemed like figuratively he was in the trenches with the rest of us who are trying to find our way.
Yeah, honestly, Charlie was in the trenches. He was willing to constantly go into places where conservatives aren't welcome, and he always was fighting for his values and conservative values.
Now, the process of the Democratic Party distancing itself from religion, that's not something that just started recently. Walk me through a little bit about how long has that been going on, at least according to your understanding.
Um, I think it's really hard to find like a specific point, but I think that one thing you could look at was the 1980 election because Jimmy Carter was a faithful Christian, like was really willing, open to talk about his faith. And I think that had that election gone another way, it would be entirely possible that we would see a more socially conservative, like social democratic party and a more socially liberal Republican party. But I think that because of that election, the coalition shifted and you started to see the rise of a religious right and then the rise of a secular left.
I know in your article you mentioned that sometimes we hear the I'm going to call it the epithet of Christian nationalism, or talk of blurring the line between church and state as reasons for why Democrats and some of those within the culture will push back on the idea of religious belief. Talk to me a little bit about Christian nationalism. I understand that it's something that makes some people very, very nervous, but I don't know that I have a clear understanding of what exactly that is supposed to mean.
I tend to be of the opinion that the idea of Christian nationalism is mostly made up by the left. Like there's a few people on the right who like have adopted it kind of because they view it as a term that can be useful. But I think that usually what it is they found that Christian nationalism is an effective way to attack pretty commonly held conservative views. And I think that that's mainly what it is.
Yeah, it's and in fact sometimes it seems like it's used as kind of a softer accusation of some kind of either white supremacist or white separatist sympathies. Without actually coming out and calling people that, if I say Christian nationalism, well, we know that the Nazis were nationalists, and so therefore there's kind of a guilt by association game being played there.
Yeah, that's mostly what my read is. Like I'm sure that there may be a few kooks out here who like are actually hardcore, call themselves Christian national, but again, that's not there's no broad movement for Christian nationalism in the United States.
So, Benjamin, tell me this: with Gen Z, more and more embracing faith, or at least not shying away from it. Um, I know there are concerns that, well, does this mean that we're going to be tipping over into a theocracy or something like that? How can the Christian faith be a part of our American cultural values without becoming entangled with the state?
I think that the main thing is that right now, young people and people in general are looking for community, and I think that church provides a community in a way that no other thing does. School doesn't provide it, work doesn't provide it. So I think that where people come together at least once a week to worship, that is the best way to build community.
And I'm going to ask you to prognosticate. We got about 1 minute left here. Um, where does this go in the future? I mean, the numbers of Gen Z, I think, are considerable. Their influence on culture as well as politics is only beginning to be felt. Are we turning a corner?
It's hard to tell. I'd say that right now it certainly feels like it. And in some ways, I hope it does.
All right. Again, we're talking with Benjamin Rothove. He's a Young Voices contributor studying economics and political science at University of Wisconsin-Madison. Benjamin, for those who would like to follow your work or otherwise would like to follow you on social media, what's the best place to find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Benjamin Rothove.
All right. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking with you. I look forward to the next time we get to chat.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Hey, we are happy to welcome Kyle Moran back to the program. Kyle, you've been on here before, but I know there are people meeting you for the very first time. Take a moment, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I am a contributor with Young Voices. I'm also the antitrust fellow there. My background is in political science and international relations. I've I've had my research published with the American Enterprise Institute's Critical Threats Project, and I'm joining today with my latest in the American Spectator on opioids in Medicare.
This is a really eye-opening article as well. And I'll admit I had some peripheral awareness of this, but I really didn't understand just how bad the situation is. When we talk about the title here is why won't Medicare give up its opioid addiction? Set the stage for me here. When we talk about Medicare and opioids, what's the disparity that you're calling out here in how pain medication is handled under Medicare?
Yeah, so they have for a very long time been using a what's called fail first approach. So some of the newer drugs, in particular, there's Jornavix, which was recently approved in January of this year, which is one of the first that is as effective at fighting pain as the opioids themselves, because we've had non-opioid painkillers for quite some time. The issue is that when you're in a lot of pain, they're not exactly the most effective. This is actually something that does work quite well. It's on par with opioids. So, for many, many people, this would be just as effective with far less addictive qualities. So, this is something we should definitely be prescribing more often instead of using opioids first. The downside from Medicare's perspective is that it is more expensive. So, because instead of being like $1 a pill, which is what a lot of opioids are, or cheaper, this is about $15 a pill.
Ooh.
That is more expensive, but it's also not something where it's like $3,000 for a bottle, which some medicines are or more. But they're looking at it from a cost perspective. But my argument is that they get this backwards because yes, the pill itself may be more expensive, but both in terms of overall health quality in this country, which has been racked by opioids, many of the addictions start with prescription opioids, as well as cost of treatment, does not get factored into this. So, from both perspectives, the approach so far has just been quite poor.
It seems like the FDA and by extension even the DEA has struggled for many years with how to deal with pain management. And I say it from the standpoint of people who have chronic conditions where they deal with chronic pain, and it on the one hand there are medications out there, unfortunately, opioid medications that will address the pain, but as you point out, it comes with a cost, and that addiction is a very heavy price to pay for having that kind of relief. What's the reason why the FDA isn't streamlining the process or finding a way to justify the higher expense?
Yeah, so a part of it is just going to come down to the cost, because not everybody who takes opioid prescriptions, of course, ends up addicted, which is legitimate. There are many cases of people who take it and are not struggling with it long term. However, the abuse risk and long term dependency from it is unacceptably high, in my opinion, to be doling these out in anywhere near the quantities that we are. And even though that has improved slightly from where it was before, it's still unacceptably high, in my opinion, given how widespread this issue is. The other aspect of it is simply government is quite slow, which is unfortunate to have to say, but it is true. This new drug is this came out in early 2025, so I believe about 9 months ago now. But it just hasn't caught on to the same extent with Medicare. But we do have some encouraging signs from some other government departments. Even before this specific drug came out, the Veterans Administration was much more proactive in prescribing alternative forms of treatment, and they tried everything. I mean, you can take all different holistic approaches, and it as well as prescriptions, and had much better results than the Medicare approach.
And let's talk about this too in terms of let's put some numbers on this. I'm sure people are great with the idea of, well, government's saving money here, and we know there's a lot of overspending that's going on, but the alternative being, how many people do we lose a year to opioid addiction or overdoses for that matter?
Yeah, and thankfully in the last year or two that's started to come down. Um, but the number is still unacceptably high. And during the early years of the Biden administration, it was skyrocketing at very alarming rates, which is not good for this country. We have such a problem with drug use in the country. It's more visible in our cities where you go in and you see this normalization of it, in which people who are publicly using drugs is just tolerated because of a lot of so-called harm reduction approaches in our cities. Um, and that does have a pull effect. People who are addicted will go to these cities because they know they're not going to end up in jail. But a lot of times they end up dead because you can't be living on the street full time. People get murdered, and the health conditions are just abysmal. And we haven't done much of anything on a national level to combat this, both in our cities. And I also want to pay homage to the situation, which is far less visible, but nevertheless as important outside of our cities. Again, when you go into New York or, God forbid, like Portland, and especially the West Coast, you really see this. But when you get into more rural places, especially like West Virginia, has long been suffering from this. It's less immediately noticeable, but also quite severe.
In your article, you talk about how the rest of the world actually has been working some great solutions on this. Talk to me a little bit about um, Germany, for instance. You mentioned that their insurance covers non-drug treatments as standard care when it comes to comprehensive pain management. What do they do different than we do here in America?
We have a very interesting situation with healthcare in the United States, where we're spending astronomical amounts of money, more than any other country, and not getting very good results. It used to be that we were spending a lot of money on healthcare, but had very good quality. Uh, in certain areas, we still have excellent quality, the best in the world. But overall, our health results have been declining for years, despite just throwing more money at this, which really gets to the heart of it. We're not addressing the underlying issues. Germany did address it, as well as other countries who have not prescribed opioids in nearly this large quantity. And it really just comes down to, when you go into a hospital and you have surgery, uh, do you need specifically an opioid? And if not, can you at least start on something not opioid related? Just one anecdotal instance: when I had my wisdom teeth out, they sent me home with a bottle of Percocet. I didn't take any of it, but that's just standard practice.
Interesting. You had mentioned too that the Alternatives to Pain Act is something Congress is not exactly moving quickly on. Um, what would it take to get them to move? I mean, is it pressure from drug companies, or what might it be?
An act of God.
Okay, fair enough.
My faith in Congress is not high, especially when it comes to speed. But on a more serious level, I do hope that they will pass this within the next year. Again, I feel ridiculous having to quote this in terms of how many years is it going to take for them to pass this, but here we are. It is unfortunate. I see absolutely no reason that this should not pass on a bipartisan basis. And I look forward to seeing some developments with it. But again, time is not of the essence for them.
Once again, we are visiting with Kyle Moran. He's a political commentator with Young Voices. Kyle, where can people find your work? Where can they find you on social media?
Sure, I'm on X at Kyle P. Moran. You can check out my full portfolio at Young Voices, their website. They have everything I write posted up there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Hey, we're happy to welcome a new contributor aboard for this segment. His name is Christian Kruse. And Christian, since this is our first time getting to meet you, I hope you'll take just a moment here to tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. Thank you very much. I'm glad to have the opportunity to be here. I'm a financial regulations researcher based out of Washington, D.C. I mainly work on issues of private securities markets and monetary policy. And that's what we're talking about today, I think.
Yeah, I'm looking at your headline from this article from the Washington Examiner. The president should not meddle in monetary policy. And
No, he
I
should
have
not.
not followed this super close, but I seem to realize there has been some friction between the president and is it the chairman of the Federal Reserve? Yeah, set me straight
Yes.
on. And can you help me understand what exactly is the controversy between them?
Sure. So, yes, President Trump has been hounding Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell for a few months now to try to lower interest rates. That's his goal. However, Jerome Powell has yet to do that. So there's a fierce war between them, and most of this is because President Trump would like some alleviation from his tariff policies, and he's hoping Jerome Powell can provide that by lowering interest rates. So that's the current situation.
And then there was also the matter of the removal or the calling for the removal of Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook. And again, I have not been following this closely, so I'm going to lean on your understanding. What was the controversy there that the president was wanting her removed from her position?
Sure. So Lisa Cook, there's an alleged mortgage fraud indictment upon her. Apparently, she may have listed two residences as her primary residence, and Trump is using this as a just cause to remove her as a Federal Reserve governor. Now, this has never happened in the history of the Federal Reserve. Since its establishment in 1913, there has not been a president has never tried, I should say, to remove a Fed governor from the board. So this is sets precedent, and I believe dangerous precedent. And it, there's an issue with the politicization of monetary policy, and going down this route, attacking the chairman, attempting to fire a Fed governor. This leads to, loss of trust in the Federal Reserve as an institution.
And I guess that's really kind of the crux of where I'm trying to understand. The Federal Reserve, even though it says federal, is not actually a branch of the federal government, although it does operate in kind of an official capacity with some kind of, is it congressional oversight? Help me better understand that.
Sure. So the Federal Reserve is made up of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, which is located in Washington, D.C. This part of the Federal Reserve System is entirely overseen by Congress. Members of the Board of Governors, who are also on the Federal Open Markets Committee, the FOMC, are nominated and appointed, nominated by the president and appointed by the Senate. However, there are 12 distinct Federal Reserve branch banks across the United States, and those and each governor runs one of these banks. And specifically, there are or they have communications with these banks, I should say. And those banks operate a little more independently. There is less oversight from them, from Congress on those banks. Yeah. And so,
okay. So
yeah.
I'll let you continue that answer.
Okay.
I don't want to cut you off
I
prematurely.
was just going to continue saying congressional oversight. While there is oversight from Congress, the Fed has a lot of independence to do pretty much whatever it wants to set monetary policy, which is the main goal currently of the Federal Reserve. Currently, we live under a framework of discretionary monetary policy. So the Board of Governors, the 12 governors, they meet 4 times a year, and they look over all of this economic data and decide how they want the interest rates for the country to go. I think this is a little bit of a poor method of running monetary policy. To dictate monetary policy by a committee of 12 people seems, how can 12 people really know what's going on in the entire country? So that's why in my article specifically, and in general, I propose we should follow a rules-based monetary policy. Run the Federal Reserve, set interest rates, target it by some sort of mathematical formula that looks at macroeconomic indicators, and based on whatever formula the Fed can choose, sets the target that way. And they can announce what formula they're using, and this way the economy will know exactly what's going to happen before the interest rates change.
So I'm saying this as a layman and not someone who is well versed in this knowledge, but
Mhm.
if I understand correctly, when the Fed goes about setting monetary policy, essentially it comes down to they are choosing whether to expand or contract the issuance of credit, and that can be done through the control of interest rates. With higher interest rates, it's harder to get that credit. With lower interest rates, it's easier to get credit. Am I even in the ballpark in how I'm understanding that?
Yes, the Fed's job is to set a target for the federal funds rate, which is the interest rate that banks lend at, essentially. Traditionally, they've done that by purchasing treasury bonds and issuing those reserves into the market, and that can that has an effect on the treasury bond, which then has an effect on the federal funds rate. After 2008. The Fed flooded the market with reserves with these treasury bonds and other forms of capital. So that method doesn't really work anymore. So nowadays, they actually offer banks interest on reserves that the banks hold at the Fed itself. This wasn't an issue up until the pandemic, essentially. But since then, the Fed has raised the FFR, which means that the interest that they're paying banks has gone up substantially. So now we have another concern where the Fed is running a deficit every year, which they say is not a bad thing, but I'd like to disagree.
It's, I guess the question is it something that is sustainable indefinitely, or does there come a point where they can't continue to do that?
It definitely will reach a precipice at some point. We really don't know when, but we're in this issue currently of if the Fed continues to do this and set monetary policy in this way, it's very dangerous. I mean, our central bank is liable for trillions of dollars, a few billion dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars, and there's trillions of dollars of assets that are being held at the Fed. And if that continues to grow, that along with our debt problem on the congressional side, on the fiscal spending side, that's a cause for concern.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about when the president wants to fiddle with monetary
Mhm.
policy. There are precedents that we can look at where other heads of state have done this with their banking systems. What is some of the danger that's involved with that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of danger. Most presidents, pretty much everyone that wants to meddle with monetary policy, they want to lower rates. Lower rates increases lending, which increases economic activity. They want to say, "Oh, look, we've boosted the economy this much percentage," and they've done that by lowering rates. So every president would like rates to be lowered. Sometimes, however, that's not what the economy needs. So, for example, in Turkey in 2022, the president of Turkey pressured the Federal Reserve to lower rates substantially. And this did not go well. He thought that if there was very high inflation, you should lower rates. And other central banks don't agree with that. There's plenty of research on why that does not work. And likewise, they had an incredible amount of inflation. I believe somewhere north of 85%. For juxtaposition, in the United States at that same time, we had only had a 9% inflation. And that sent everyone here into, a hubbub, into a stir. So they had it much worse. And that shows you the issue with lowering rates in an inflationary period, which right now we have slightly high inflation. The Fed's target is 2%, and we're a little above that. And currently the FFR sits at 4.3%, I believe. And lowering that further, it might increase inflation. It just depends on, the connection between the unemployment rates and inflation, some other indicators.
So I'm sorry to give you such a short time frame to answer this. We've got about 30 seconds.
Sure, yeah.
Is the best thing for the president to step back and let the Fed governors do their jobs?
It is. And this is why I advocate for rules-based monetary policy, because if Congress requires the Fed to follow a rule, there is no way that the president can politicize the board meetings. There is no vote. The rule is followed by a mathematical formula. So the Fed is required to follow that rule. If that happens, there's no opportunity for politicization of the Fed. And therefore, this whole concern just kind of dissipates.
Again, we are speaking with Christian Cruse. He is a Young Voices contributor. Christian, thank you. This is really enlightening. I feel like I learned a lot from this conversation.
I'm glad.
Where can people follow you or find you on social media?
They can find me on Twitter at Christian J. Cruse, and that'd be the best place. Yeah.
Okay. Hey, thanks again. I hope we get a chance to talk about this soon. I'm sure this is going to be a relevant issue for a while.
It will, yes. Yeah, thank you very much.
And we are back. This is our fourth and final segment today on Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome Tate Kaufman back to the program. Tate, we've had you on here before, but for folks who are hearing you for the first time, take a moment. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Hey, thanks for having me, Brian. I'm originally from Calgary, Canada, did my undergraduate in Vancouver at the University of British Columbia before coming down to the DC area for law school. I'm a big civil libertarian, which is a big part of the reason why I came down to the United States to sort of refine my advocacy skills in that regards. And as is slightly relevant to this article, I'm a big live music fan. I love to get around town. And DC has been just a fantastic city for me from that point of view.
So DC has also been in the headlines here lately with the use of the National Guard and federal agencies cracking down on crime. And I know the Trump administration is saying, oh, well, you know, crime is down. I think they were saying something like 40%. Tell me, in your experience, what was it like before this crackdown? Is there merit to the claims? I know politicians will always say things in the best possible light for their policies, but what are your thoughts on the way that crime has been addressed here of late?
Yeah, well, look, so before there's my personal point of view and there's the numbers. And I think, frankly, you know, I'm a big guy. I'm somewhat aggressive looking. I've got cauliflower year from about a decade of wrestling and jujitsu. So I think my experiences milling about town might be slightly different from the average person. But to me, DC has always felt like a very safe place. I've never really had any troubles. I've had a few run-ins on the subway, but nothing that I wouldn't expect basically anywhere, Canada or the United States. Now, the numbers do show, they don't lie. Carjackings were up something like 460% from 2016 through to 2023. That's insane. DC had the fourth highest murder rate in the nation last year, also insane. And I think the year prior to that might have had the top murder rate in the nation. And the amount of strife that businesses have to go through in especially downtown DC and the southeast of DC. I mean, you can hardly walk into a CVS without half the shelves having to be locked up to prevent against thievery. And of course, that drives prices up for you and me because we're paying to cover the losses. And it also makes it really hard to operate a business. So I do sympathize with the business owners who are dealing with theft, especially the sort of massive issue of youth crime who are often masked wearing the balaclavas. I think they call them shiesties is the vernacular term for them. But have things changed substantially since the federal takeover? In my view, I haven't seen a ton of difference. Now, they pointed to statistics that restaurant revenues are up by something like 20%. Frankly, I think if that's the statistic you're pointing to, you're maybe a bit strained in your analysis of the cause and effect. But I have seen other statistics that crime is down. So there's no question that putting more bodies on the street, that surveilling people more often, that occupying public thoroughfares, especially subway stations where a lot of crime does happen. There's no question that that can be effective, and it may very well be effective. But just because it's effective doesn't mean it's the right approach in the broader constitutional scheme.
No, that makes sense. And it's not limited to Washington, D.C. I was just reading today that yesterday the White House issued a memorandum for Memphis, Tennessee, talking about how crime is up, 400% or 300 something percent over the last couple of years. And the idea that the National Guard and other federal agencies should be used for policing seems to run contrary to what I guess most of us raised in the U.S. were taught the proper role of our federal government was supposed to be. On the one hand, it may be comforting for some people to see a soldier standing on the corner. It makes me a little bit uneasy to think that we're in the kind of society where that would be necessary or would be considered justified.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is a concern that runs very deep. The Declaration of Independence, one of the grievances in there was that the king was keeping standing armies at times of peace without the consent of the colony legislatures, and was allowing for military enforcement of civil order. That was something that allowed the king to impose tyranny on the American people, to override their attempts at self-governance. And we have a federal system for a reason. It allows people to govern closer to home. I know people like myself who are interested in civil libertarian causes and have been in the libertarian legal sphere have plenty of grievances to poke with state police powers and the extent to which they're wielded. But the one thing everyone seems to agree on in the legal sphere is that the police powers always and will always belong to the states and not to the federal government. Now, back home in Canada, it's very different. We have the RCMP, who famously wear the hats, ride the horses, have the bright red outfits, and they're a federal police force. They exercise a gamut of powers like drug enforcement, firearms enforcement, on-street policing, surveillance, national security. They basically perform the functions of a whole collection of different American law enforcement and security agencies. Okay, perfect. You cut out a bit there, so I just want to make sure. Still good?
I'm still here.
Excellent.
Yeah. Talk to me about some of the parallels, though, between what we saw in Canada, for instance, with the 2022 truckers freedom convoy. It seems like we may be setting the stage for something similar with the use of the National Guard policing here in the U.S.
Yeah, so look, those familiar with the trucker convoy, this was basically a protest against a variety of different COVID mandates. Some of it was more on the ideological vaccine hesitancy side of things. Some of it was more on the pure practical economic. People were having a hard time getting work on cross-border trucking, which as viewers may know, Canada can't grow all that much food. So cross-border trucking is incredibly important for produce. And a bunch of truckers went to Ottawa to protest these new restrictions. Now, because Canada has a federal police force, Trudeau was very easily able to declare a national emergency and then use that federal police force to crack down on these protesters without regards for their civil liberties, using an emergency order. And of course, the American Constitution has far more rigid structural protections of civil liberties. There's no easy out as there is with the Emergencies Act in Canada. But we do run a real risk when we start looking at implementing the National Guard, or today at his testimony, Kash Patel talked about potentially using the FBI in a similar manner, integrating more with local law enforcement, with creating a federally controlled police force that spans cities nationwide. Whether that's in Memphis, DC, or as a district court in California held just earlier this month in Los Angeles, pushes the bounds of legality within our constitutional structure.
Well, you make the point in your article that the separation of powers and protection of civil liberties are not things that we should be weakening in America. And I mean, I no disrespect to Canada, but I think I would take our system over the Canadian system based on that distinction.
Mm-hmm. Well, look, I mean, you can do the comparative analysis where Canada really isn't all that much better on crime. The recidivist outcomes, for example, in Vancouver, there's roughly 60 people were responsible for something like 4,000 different crimes committed over a span of a few years. That comes down to bad prosecution, to letting people off easily. They aren't executive fixes on the law enforcement side. And so I think we need to turn our attention to other places where these problems can be permanently fixed.
Again, we are visiting with Tate Kaufman. He is a Young Voices contributor and editor for the National Security Law Journal. Where can people find you on social media?
They can find me, not a big social media guy, Tate Kaufman on LinkedIn if you want to connect with me, message with me. Elsewise, I'm sure you can find my contact info online. Shoot me a note. Great speaking with you today, Brian.
Thank you.